Welcome back to Jeff Ganaga Live here at Citizen Television, having a great chat and a laugh with the Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Dr. Korir Singh-Oei. Talking about a lot of issues, a lot of them serious issues, and yes, what's the way forward? Dr. Before the break, I asked you about Donald Trump's election a couple of weeks ago. What does that mean for Kenya? Because you were on the state visit with the president a few months ago, earlier in the year, where you met President Biden. He welcomed you to the White House, first African president in like 15 years to have gotten a state visit. So it was a huge deal. So what does that what happens when there's a new administration in place?
I think number one is just to say that the election of President Trump, of course, is a decision of the American people. And it is an expression of their democratic right. There has been absolutely no problem with regard to that election. There's been concessions by the vice president, and so I think it's laudable that American democracy continues to strengthen. And to give and to project a very positive example to the rest of us. But in terms of what policy the Trump administration will bring to bear on its relationship with Kenya, at this point in time, number one, we don't have the full specifics of those of the changes in policy. But suffice it to say that we've dealt with President Trump before in his first term. President Trump was very much focused on growing this relationship to the strategic level, actually. As a matter of fact, you remember that President Uhuru and President Trump were in the process of negotiating STEEP, the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. Yeah. President Biden continued that same trajectory. We are actually on the tail end now of the negotiation of STEEP. And the reason why STEEP is important is because the AGOA framework, which has enabled Kenya to access quota-free, tax-free access to U.S. market, particularly with regard to textiles that we produce, a lot of which we produce in our export processing zones, is coming to an end. All right? And so it is important for Kenya to be able to have an agreement with the United States. And that is why this STEEP framework has continued to be negotiated with the subsequent administration. It is our firm belief that because this is something that President Trump started in his first term, we are certain it will now be concluded and Kenyans will enjoy even a broader set of opportunities to be able to export to the U.S. market, the agricultural commodities, as well as their manufactured goods. And this is one of the selling points for our country, Jeff. The fact that we are entering into these critical trade and investment compacts with different parts of the world. We just entered into an agreement with the European Union, the Economic Partnership Agreement, that again enables us to access this huge market. Now, with the conclusion of STEEP and with the conclusion of CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with UAE, the whole idea really is to grow our access to markets. And that then means that investors who invest their money in Kenya, in manufacturing, in value addition, in whatever sectors, can be able to access those markets as if they're probably operating from those countries. But the beauty is that they'll be operating from Kenya, employing our young people at a cost that is way lower than the cost they would have expended in their home country.
P.S., let's not forget that Trump, in his first term, didn't even bother coming to Africa. In fact, he referred to Africa in all sorts of names I can't even mention on TV. S-hole countries, etc. What makes you think that this time around it'll change? Do you think he'll even pay a state visit to any of our countries?
President Biden did not pay a state visit to Africa, did he?
No. But he never called us names.
The point I think that matters instead.
And Dr. Biden, First Lady, visited Africa in Plinken.
You know, and Melania too. Melania Trump also visited Africa during the first time. I think she came to Malawi and Zambia, one of those countries.
Yeah.
But really the point is that sometimes we lose sight of the big picture on account merely of the rhetorics, you know, of a given leader. I think you know, our focus really is on the actions of these leaders, and the very clear indications that we're having is that Trump will be very much focused on growing the Africa-US relationship, and that might lead to a state visit, but that might not necessarily be the most important part of it. I think if we can conclude the STIP and if we can have more access to the U.S. market, that will matter much more to Kenyans, you know, than necessarily a state visit.
Yeah. Should we be worried about the mass deportations that he's been talking about of illegal immigrants? Should we be worried?
Our own view is the following, that first of all, I think the whole idea of illegal migrants is something that needs to be discouraged in any country. And so if there are people who are in the US illegally, then there is a problem. Be they Kenyans, be they Nigerians, be they Zimbabweans, be they any other nationality. That is already a problem because they are operating incompatibly with the law of that given jurisdiction. Our view then is, if in fact it were possible that illegal immigrants will leave to allow for legal migrants, persons who, by virtue of bilateral frameworks between Kenya or between a different African country and the United States, can legally migrate to the United States and access opportunities in a lawful fashion as tax-paying individuals responsible to both their host country and the country of origin, such as Kenya. I think that would be a win-win situation, you know, for us. But it is our hope, of course, that any deportations that take place humanely and in dignity, you know, and in a way that comports as well with common decency. Yeah.
P.S., what is our position on Ukraine, Kenya's position?
We took that position about 3 years ago on the floor of the United Nations Security Council, where we propounded the view that what had taken place in Ukraine was aggression. It was a clear violation of international law. It was a complete abuse of territorial integrity. We argued at that point that if that situation were allowed to obtain in Africa, it would lead to a very chaotic situation because our borders are colonially constructed. And if we were to reopen it on the basis of contiguity of communities, we will have a problem. We have Maasais in Kenya, we have Maasai in Tanzania, we have Somali in Kenya, we have Somalis, you know, in Somalia and many other places. So it would be a problematic for us. And so our position with regard to Ukraine is that what Russia has done constitutes an aggression, okay? And it is incumbent upon all parties to be able to find a pacific settlement to this dispute. The view that we hold, different from probably the Europeans, is that, again, we cannot address this issue by way of force, because the more this conflict escalates, the more we are entering even a much more perilous dimension of it, including talks around the use of nuclear weapons. And this then exposes the whole world to, you know, to a situation that we do not want to imagine.
Yeah.
And so it is incumbent upon all parties, and President Ruto made this very clear when, you know, he attended the Peace Summit on Ukraine that was held in Switzerland about 5 months ago, where he made it very clear that for there to be a return, you know, peace in Ukraine, there has to be a sitting down that involves Russia, a sitting down of parties that involves Russia. It cannot just be, you know, the views of Ukraine alone, but this conflict involves two parties, and the views of Russia must also be understood in order for sort of a solution to be extracted from what is a very difficult set of problems.
Yeah. And you saw in the last 24 hours, President Biden has approved long-range weapons for the Ukrainians. Isn't that setting up a potential World War III, if you will, because Putin has already reacted?
It is a truly, truly worrisome situation, and we hope that reason can prevail and that parties can be urged to come to the negotiating table. And that's why I was earlier speaking about the breakdown in the parchment of the international order, the order that is predicated upon the principle of non-use of force and the supremacy of the United Nations Security Council to be able to manage these kind of conflicts. Because of the fragmentation of the UN Security Council and the use of veto, it basically means that we have a very dysfunctional peace and security architecture. And that's part of the reason why Kenya and other African countries, as well as countries in the global south, have been urging for a reform of the use of veto, but more fundamentally a reform of the UN Security Council.
Yeah. Let's come back to the continent, Boniface. And in this coming January, a new United Nations, AU peacekeeping mission is going to be formed in Somalia. The Somalis have said they don't want Ethiopia included because of Ethiopia's relation with Somaliland. What is our position?
Again, to reinforce what I said with regard to Ukraine, it's very important, and this is also articulated in our policy, that we must all respect territorial integrity of other countries, because when we do that, we are able to manage conflicts. With regard to the end of term of ATMIS, there has been dealing with the problem of Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Kenya and Ethiopia have major troop contributing countries to ATMIS. We have both worked cooperatively. We have worked very hard. Our troops on the ground have been able to push back Al-Shabaab, stabilize a great deal of territory within Somalia. And it is our hope as Kenya that the post-ATMIS landscape would include Ethiopia. Now, we understand the challenges around the MOU that Ethiopia has with Somaliland. What we have done is to continue to urge both parties, both Ethiopia, but particularly our brothers in Somalia. And President Ruto has been on phone and has had bilateral meetings with President Hassan Sheikh to urge for a more pragmatic view of the matter. Basically to look at the big picture and to decouple the issue of the MOU from the stabilization of Somalia, because it is our view that Ethiopia has a very, very important role to play. They also have a very long border with Somalia, and it is their view that if they are not involved, their own security might be compromised, and therefore they do have skin in the game. And they have acted in very good faith through the entire 4 or so years when ATMIS has been in operation. Yeah. And so we continue to talk on these very difficult issues. It is our hope that we should be able to find a way forward.
It's almost like you're tiptoeing around this issue, Boniface. So, for lack of a better word, it's difficult, pleasing this side, pleasing that side.
Indeed. The region has become complex. I think that's part of why you characterize our behavior as that of tiptoeing, because indeed it is a very dynamic region, and there is a variety of interests at play. And Kenya is the one country that is considered neutral. And so we must play the arbiter, for the balancing of a diversity of interests, because we are considered a fairly honest broker.
Are we still an honest broker when it comes to DRC? Do we still have, what's the mission over there? Has it been completed?
The mission was successfully handed over to a succeeding peacekeeping mission under the leadership of SADC. You recall that ISAF, which is the East African Support Force, that was on the ground, ensured the stabilization of Eastern DRC up to a certain measure, and there was sort of an expectation gap between Kinshasa and ISAF that was led by Kenya with regard to how we treat M23. ISAF and Kenya particularly felt very strongly that what was necessary is dialogue with M23, particularly given that M23 appears to be comprised largely of, of populations from that part of the country, and they do want to dialogue with their own government. And therefore our preference was through the Nairobi process, let's dialogue with different rebel groups, and we thought we had the green light of the authorities in Kinshasa, but over time it has appeared as if quite some mistrust developed, and therefore Kinshasa felt that it wanted a handover to the SADC-led mission, which is currently on the ground. But of course, Kenya still continues to play a role, under the framework of the United Nations mission in DRC, MONUSCO, where we have a deployment there as well. And so we continue to talk, and we are trying to address whatever political challenges we have with the DRC administration. On the commercial side and on the economic side, we are still seeing quite a tremendous growth in business between Kenya and DRC. In fact, over the last couple of months, we've seen an increase in the use of Port of Mombasa by DRC companies by about 15%. Vis-a-vis last year. And so it is our view really that even the political sort of challenges that we may have will also find resolution in due course.
So there's hope?
There's hope.
Bernard Pierce, I want to take a break, come back and talk about AUC, our candidate over there, none other than Baba himself. What are his chances, Pierce? What are his chances? I mean, February, where are we? November, December, it's 2 months away until we find out whether Raila Odinga becomes the chairman of the African Union Commission.
Absolutely.
What are the chances? PS will let us know. And we'll get to the magic wall, because I hear and I notice the reactions are coming in thick and fast. Thick and fast. Keep them coming at Koinange Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, the hashtag JK Live. JK Live takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.